So I was compiling a bunch of different horror movies and just general spooky, scary movies that I've seen all throughout the year for this video, and I totally forgot that I saw a film called The Shortcut, and The Shortcut is actually a horror movie made by Happy Madison. Well, it was made by a subdivision they had called Scary Madison, but yeah, Happy Madison, they made a horror film. And from what I remember, it was actually kind of decent. Hey everybody, Adam Sykes here, and just like last year with the 11 movies, one review video, where I took a bunch of different horror movies and just kind of talked about them in one big video, I'm going to be doing the same thing. These are just a bunch of different movies I saw a couple days ago, actually all throughout the year, that I remembered that could potentially be Blockbuster videos, so I have them listed so we can talk about them for this video. I grew up watching Ernest a little bit when I was young, and I mean, Ernest, the movies, they kind of explain themselves. Like, they can be really stupid. And don't worry, this movie has a lot of stupid moments in it, but you know what? I kind of like what this movie was going for. Like, I forgot what the whole premise was about, so rewatching this again, the fact that this movie is about Ernest trying to take on a bunch of evil trolls, I kind of appreciate what this movie was going for. So Ernest in this movie is a trash truck driver. He's friends with a lot of the local kids, gives them advice when they're being bullied. And there's this crazy old woman played by Eartha Kitt, and she tells him that there's some kind of ancient burial ground for this 200-year-old troll. They better not go near it and say a specific chant, which of course Ernest does. And the reason they were going there is so that they could build a treehouse for the kids. Ernest ends up saying the chant, and of course the troll is awakened. And it's shocking to see the effects in this movie are actually pretty decent. And the reason for that is because a lot of the prosthetics that were used in the masks were actually from the very first movie we ever reviewed for a Blockbusters Halloween video. It was from Killer Clowns from Outer Space, so they reused a lot of the prosthetics from that. And so from there, as the trolls are picking off kids one by one, and by that I mean they don't kill the kids, they just turn them into these little wooden statues. Eartha Kitt tells them that the only way to stop the trolls is their weakness is milk. So at the end of the movie, it's just constantly throwing milk onto trolls, and that's what defeats them. I mean, this sounds stupid, but unlike something like Troll 2, which was supposed to be serious, I could actually kind of buy the kind of stupid crap that's on in this movie. In fact, one funny joke I actually laughed at was the fact that Ernest accidentally reads the book that has the weakness listed out. He misreads it as Miak, and he actually gets a bottle of ancient Bulgarian Miak.
Let's see how you like a little Miak. Yeah, Miak. I bet you thought I couldn't find any this time of year.
It's dumb, but I laughed at it, and that kind of summarizes the whole movie. It's stupid, but I mean, if you want a harmless little family movie from early 90s, I recommend this one. What I wouldn't recommend is My Pet Monster. So I saw this one shortly after I did the review of Skateboard Kid, and just like Skateboard Kid and Flying Ryan, this movie has the problem of a bunch of other shitty, low-budget, straight-to-video kids movies in that it has an interesting concept for a family film, and it's totally pushed to the wayside for something really bland and lame. It turns out this movie is based on a toy that came out around that time, and so how do you turn a toy into a TV movie? Well, here's how they tried. So you have this kid, and his class is doing a field trip, and they're going down this whole monster civilization, ancient relic thing that, of course, still has magical abilities. It hits the kid, and the kid turns into a monster, and he's able to transform back and forth from human to monster whenever he's hungry. So I'm like, okay, that's the premise, that's the setup, and yet from there, they have to have this stupid plot line of the brother's girlfriend's dog to this groomer and get them in this dog show. I don't know why they put that in a movie called My Pet Monster, but okay, yeah, sure, why not? And so from there, you have these bumbling dog catchers there trying to catch the kid because they think he's some kind of dog, even though he's a monster and he looks nothing like an actual dog. And the guy who's in charge of the museum is fascinated with monsters, so he's trying to catch the monster kid too. His whole thing is weird because the movie ends with this.
It was I who found you. I who dragged you from muddy obscurity and restored you to your ancient splendor.
And And what happens after that? I don't know. The movie just kind of stops. It just ends on him getting zapped by lightning from this thing. So does he turn into a monster and kill people? That felt like sequel bait, but I highly doubt anyone even sat there thinking, yeah, this is going to totally get a sequel. Last thing I want to say about the movie is the effects. It's a TV movie. They suck. The monster costume in this is honestly a hair above the Troll 2 goblins, and even then I feel like that's a bit of a stretch. Terror Vision is actually a pretty badass little movie from the 80s. It's about this family that get a new satellite for their TV, and it ends up beaming an alien from another planet there. And at first the kid tries to befriend this big lug alien monster, and it seems that things are going to go pretty well at first, but obviously it's a giant alien blob monster with a bunch of eyes and tentacles and sharp teeth, so it's going to want to feast on these people. This is one of those movies you could just tell they were like, we're going to make the most balls to the wall, stupidest little horror flick we can possibly make. This is kind of the same thing as something like Killer Clowns from Outer Space, where they're in on the joke, and it doesn't feel like they're constantly winking at the camera and nudge nudge. Look, see? This is the joke. This is supposed to be stupid. This movie knows that it's stupid, but it never once tries to force that onto the audience, and it just kind of embraces its silliness. And the effects, for a very silly movie, actually pretty impressive. The monster design and the monster animatronic looks really good. Yeah, Terror Vision. If you can somehow find it, I highly recommend this one. And speaking of television-themed horror films, even though this one's more of a dark comedy than it is a horror movie like the last one, this one is called Stay Tuned. It's about a family that gets a new television satellite installed, and they're able to get a bunch of new channels, and it turns out that this satellite can suck people into the TV, and what they get is a bunch of these demonic, satanic parodies of actual shows. The parents of this family get sucked in, and they're gonna have to work their way around the horn and go through each channel and see if they can survive. And honestly, this movie's very creative. It has a very good setup, very good premise. The kids end up finding out halfway through because they see this cartoon that's like a parody of like Chuck Jones or Tom and Jerry kind of stuff. There's a parody of Three's Company, which is kind of funny because John Ritter is in the movie as like one of the main characters, so I thought that was pretty funny. So yeah, I highly recommend Stay Tuned with its creative premise, likable cast of characters, pretty funny dark humor all throughout. Yeah, I recommend this one. So on Blockbusters, we did a full review of Jack Frost 2, and I also briefly talked about Leprechaun 4 in the last October horror movie marathon video. And before we were taking fairy tales to try and make them like Resident Evil with stuff like Hansel and Gretel, witch hunters, and shit like that, we had these kind of self-aware horror comedies that were supposed to be milking off of the success of Leprechaun. And here are two prime examples. We got Rumpelstiltskin and Pinocchio's Revenge. So Rumpelstiltskin's this little demonic guy who kidnaps children, and the only way to defeat him is if you say his name out loud. And he's defeated like a long, long time ago, and he's reawakened in the modern 90s. There's our main protagonist, who's this single mother, and she has a kid. Of course, Rumpelstiltskin goes after the kid, and there's a bunch of him running around trying to get to the kid. And really, it's the best they could have done with a stupid concept like this. You got this guy who sounds like he's trying to do like a Billy Crystal impression, making one-liners as he's driving a semi-truck.
Come to Papa, little baby.
No, baby. I've been tricked.
And Pinocchio's Revenge, this one just sucks. I remember I kept seeing the DVD for this when we worked at Blockbuster, and we never watched it. And then I, out of morbid curiosity, I'm like, yeah, I should check that out. And man, does this one suck. Just like Rumpelstiltskin, you have a single mother, she has a boyfriend, and her daughter is like obsessed with dolls. And there's a recent murder that happens that she has to investigate, and she finds that there's a puppet that's supposed to be Pinocchio at the crime scene, so she takes it in as evidence, and her daughter's birthday's coming up, so she has it in the backseat of her car when she's getting home from work, and the daughter's like, hey, I want that. Can that be my new birthday present? And the mom just kind of goes with it after her boyfriend's like, oh, come on, she loves it. Let her have it. The biggest problem with this movie that I found was that it doesn't seem to know what it wants to be. It doesn't know if it wants to be like Child's Play, where you have a killer puppet running around. And it also feels like it wants to be a psychological thriller. Like there's constant flip-flop back and forth of, well, is it the kid doing the murders? Because a bunch of murders start happening from there. Like, this little girl who was mean to her at school gets killed. It feels like they were trying to do a psychological thriller, kind of what the first Child's Play was supposed to be, but they really don't do that good of a job. I mean, the end of the movie has the puppet is carrying a knife, trying to kill the main lady, and then she grabs the puppet, throws it into her glass table, and then, oh, it turns out that it's the daughter. Also, there's weird parts all throughout where the puppet's supposed to be talking and his lips aren't moving. And part of me felt like that was supposed to be intentional, but at the same time, I feel like, no, they just couldn't have the animatronic work for the whole duration of the film. And also, it doesn't help the fact that the puppet's voice sounds like Jimmy Neutron, so it's really not threatening.
Getting rid of David would be a good thing. The same way punishing that bitch at school was a good thing.
Okay, Ginger Dead Man 3. Since I talked about Ginger Dead Man 1 in the last October horror movie marathon video, and I also talked about Ginger Dead Man 2 in the Dakota-thon video as kind of a bonus, let's just round this off with Ginger Dead Man 3. This one is easily the worst out of the three movies. The first one was just kind of boring, while having some occasionally funny moments just from Gary Busey being a cookie. And the second one had kind of a self-aware sense of humor to it, which I kind of appreciated. This one is just so dumb, it's not even funny. The subtitle for this movie is Saturday Night Cleaver, and here's why. The movie begins with a whole parody of Silence of the Lambs, which, yeah, that hasn't been done before. And the Ginger Dead Man, not played by Gary Busey, not even played by a good Gary Busey impersonator this time around. It's a guy doing a really dumb, fake, thick Southern accent, like he's trying to be a knockoff Yosemite Sam. He ends up getting his hands on a time machine because why not? And he goes back in time to like a disco roller rink. And for some reason this movie just becomes one big parody of Carrie. It's Carrie, but it takes place in a 70s roller rink, featuring the Ginger Dead Man. I don't know why, but it just becomes that. It's not funny with its parody. There's barely any kills in this movie. And for a horror comedy, that's really lame. Just all the jokes and all the mugging and the stupidity and the poor production just makes the whole thing seem like it was rushed. And I really, really didn't like this one. Even the first two. The first one had boring moments. The second one could be stupid. But this one is just so painfully bad. And speaking of parody, we got another parody movie. We have Shriek If You Know What I Did last Friday the 13th. So when I first heard about this movie, I heard about it through the trailer. And in the trailer they say, in the spoof of a spoof. So I'm like, it's a parody of Scary Movie 1? But no, it's not. It's, I guess, more of a knockoff of Scary Movie. The reason I think it's supposed to be a parody of Scary Movie is because they have a whole scene where they're sitting down and they're parodying the scene from Scream where it's the rules of how to survive a horror movie. But here it's how to survive a parody movie. I was like, wait a minute, so is this supposed to be a parody of a parody movie? Because if it is, there's a good idea in there, especially considering how awful parody movies have gotten over the years. A lot of the problems with this movie fall under other problems with bad comedies in general, that a lot of the humor is either based on easy sex jokes, people falling over, getting hit in the head, making goofy expressions, kicked to the nuts, fart jokes, all that kind of stuff. And then they have references that are just so random. Like one gag they have is that the principal is called Principal, aka the superintendent formerly known as. Like, get it? It's a Prince reference. Although one interesting thing I want to point out, this movie is called Shriek If You Know What I Did last Friday the 13th. And apparently Seltzerberg's original draft of Scary Movie was called Scream If You Know What I Did Last Halloween. And I also found out on IMDb that apparently a lot of their script wasn't even used in Scary Movie. But since they conveniently wrote a script that was a cross of Scream and You Know What I Did Last Summer, they had to technically credit them as being 2 of 6 writers. So does that mean that Seltzerberg's version of Scary Movie would have looked like this instead of the actual first Scary Movie? I don't think so.
But hey, that's just a theory, a game theory.
And as for the acting, it's very stilted. Everyone's just kind of mugging all throughout the movie, and one of the only celebrities I was able to recognize was Tom Arnold.
How many times do you think we've heard that in our lives, huh?
Even if you don't like the first Scary Movie, just watch that instead of this. I really didn't care for this movie that much. That said, as much as I'm saying this movie's bad, I think this one was actually way better than Meet the Spartans. This was made at a time when a lot of straight-to-video schlocky parody movies with stuff like this and what's another one that I saw? Silence of the Hams. Tons of stuff like this was getting released. So, I mean, I'm kind of easier on it, especially the fact that it did just go straight to video. Next up is this animated movie called Igor, and honestly, this one's alright. It's nothing special, but it's fine. It takes place in a world where you have masters and Igors, like the Frankenstein story. Every year there's a mad scientist competition, but the main character is an Igor who wants to be a mad scientist himself. He has his own little crew of inventions that he has, and they're supposed to be comic relief. You got this rabbit that can't die, and he's played by Steve Buscemi. You got the world's smartest brain in a jar, and the joke is that it's really stupid. So the main Igor, played by John Cusack, accidentally kills off his master, and so now he can create his own invention for the big competition, and what he ends up making is a monster. He tries to bring on life. He creates this monster that's not threatening, and since he gave it a heart, the monster is obviously nice. But he wants it to be evil for the big competition so that people will take him seriously, and the monster starts developing feelings for him, and they love each other, and by the end of the movie they end up getting together. Like I said, the writing is just okay, the animation is just okay. It's a harmless movie. I would recommend families watch it. It's way better than some of the other shitty family movies I've sat through recently. So yeah, I'd recommend people check this one out. If you have kids, they might enjoy it. And lastly, we end on The Stuff, which is a cheesy 80s horror movie that I actually really enjoy. The Stuff is about this ice cream yogurt kind of thing that people are just loving when it gets released. And it turns out that the stuff actually has mind-controlling abilities, and there's people who want to get their hands on the stuff so that they can control all society. And you have a bunch of different main characters. You have this kid that's weary of it, and his family becomes controlled by it. There's a main female character who's trying to stop the stuff. And one of my favorite things is there is a part where the main guy is driving through these backwoods trying to get to the facility that has the stuff, and he comes across this guy, and the guy's name is Chocolate Chip Charlie.
You're Chocolate Chip Charlie.
I mean, from there, it's basically a monster movie. They're trying to stop the stuff. They're getting the stuff out of the ground. They're vacuuming it out of the ground because it was like a meteor that landed to Earth. This company is using the stuff to mind control people, basically. And so it's up to this ragtag team of heroes to stop it. And like I said, it's a very cheesy 80s movie, but the fact that they take it so seriously, and the fact that they put lots of effort into this film, compared to something like Ginger Dead Man, where nobody cared, this movie has a surprising amount of effort. The effects on the stuff are really solid.
What is this, World War III?
The one thing I didn't like was the ending, which feels really all over the place, because the military gets involved and they try to use a radio system to try and broadcast to the world that the stuff is bad and that they shouldn't be eating it. You flash forward a couple of years, and the stuff is now like a drug being sold on the black market, and that's just kind of it. So I was just like, wait a minute, where did this come from? Is this all of a sudden a commentary on the war on drugs? I mean, it was the 80s, So that's really all I have for this little horror movie spooktacular. Tune in next time on Blockbusters Show, where we're going to have a full-length review of the first Troll from 1986, which has nothing to do with Troll 2. So I'm looking forward to that. Until then, I'm Adam Sykes of the Blockbusters Show. See you guys in the next video.